Fellow travelers, welcome back to the Trip Raider. If you're planning a trip to the United States, you're in for an exciting adventure. The US is full of diverse cities, landscapes, and cultures, but there are a few things you might want to avoid doing while you're here to ensure a smooth and enjoyable trip. Today, I'm rating what not to do when visiting America, so you can avoid some of the common pitfalls and feel like a local in no time. Let's get into it. First up, don't assume everyone knows a second language. The US is a big melting pot of cultures, but English is the dominant language here. And while you'll find pockets of people who speak other languages, it's best to be prepared to use English for most interactions. Learning a few key phrases or downloading a translation app can help you in a pinch. It's not a big deal, but it'll make your trip a bit easier. Rating: 7 out of 10 for importance. Next, don't forget to tip. In many countries, tipping is optional or included in the bill, but in the US, tipping is expected in most service industries. This includes restaurants, taxis, and even hotel staff. Generally, a tip of 15 to 20% is standard at restaurants. Not tipping, especially when the service has been good, can come across as rude. It's just part of the culture, so keep some extra cash or be prepared to add it to your card when you pay. Rating: 9 out of 10 for importance. Now, don't assume public transportation is the same everywhere. The US is very spread out, and while cities like New York and Chicago have great public transportation systems, many parts of the country don't. In smaller cities or rural areas, you may find it hard to get around without renting a car. If you're used to efficient subways or trains, this might catch you off guard, so plan ahead depending on where you're visiting. Rating: 8 out of 10 for importance. Don't be offended by small talk. Americans tend to be friendly and chatty, even with strangers. It's common for someone to strike up a conversation while you're in line at a store, waiting for your coffee, or sitting next to them on public transportation. These conversations are usually casual and not meant to invade your privacy. They're just part of the culture. Feel free to join in, or just nod and smile if you're not in the mood to talk. Rating: 6 out of 10 for importance. Speaking of conversations, don't bring up politics or religion right away. While Americans are known for being open, these topics can be divisive, and it's best to avoid them unless you know the person well. Stick to neutral topics like sports, food, or travel when meeting new people, and save the heavy topics for later, if at all. Rating: 8 out of 10 for importance. Don't expect everything to be within walking distance. Unlike many European cities, most American cities are built with cars in mind. Even if you're in a city, it might not be very walkable, and things like restaurants or stores could be spread out. You might have to use rideshare apps like Uber or Lyft more often than you're used to. It's definitely a change if you're used to being able to walk everywhere, but just plan accordingly. Rating: 7 out of 10 for importance. Another tip: don't jaywalk. In many parts of the US, jaywalking, or crossing the street anywhere but a crosswalk, can get you a fine or at least a disapproving look. In cities like New York, you might see people doing it, but in most places, it's best to wait for the light or use the crosswalk. Not only is it safer, but it's also the law in many places. Rating: 6 out of 10 for importance. Don't skip the sales tax. One thing that surprises a lot of visitors is that the price you see on an item isn't the price you'll pay at checkout. Most states in the US have a sales tax that's added on when you pay. It can range from a few percent to over 10%, depending on where you are. So if something says it costs $10, be prepared to pay a bit more than that when it's all said and done. Rating: 7 out of 10 for importance. Don't assume healthcare is free or cheap. In case of an emergency, be aware that medical care in the US can be very expensive if you don't have insurance. It's a good idea to have travel insurance that covers medical issues, just in case. Hopefully, you won't need it, but better to be safe than sorry, as medical bills can quickly add up. Rating: 9 out of 10 for importance. Finally, don't underestimate distances. The US is huge, and what looks like a short drive on a map might take several hours or more. For example, if you're planning to drive from New York to Florida, that's about 1,200 miles. It'll take you around 18 hours without stops. If you're visiting multiple states or planning a road trip, make sure you leave enough time to get from place to place, and consider flying if the distance is too long. Rating: 8 out of 10 for importance. Looking for even more tips? Here are some bonus ones just for you. First, Don't assume there's free Wi-Fi everywhere. In some countries, free public Wi-Fi is readily available, but in the US, it can be a bit hit or miss. While big cities, airports, and coffee shops often have Wi-Fi, rural areas and small businesses may not. Even in public places, it might not always be free or reliable. If you rely on internet access for maps or communication, it's a good idea to get a local SIM card or ensure your phone plan has good roaming coverage. Another thing to keep in mind, always carry your ID. In the US, you need to be 21 years old to buy alcohol, and you'll almost always be asked to show identification, even if you look older. It's common practice, and some places are strict about it. Whether you're visiting a bar or buying alcohol at a store, be prepared to show your passport or a valid ID, especially if you're not a US citizen. Speaking of going out, don't expect late-night dining everywhere. In major cities, you'll find plenty of restaurants open late, but in many smaller towns and suburbs, restaurants and stores can close surprisingly early, sometimes by 9 or 10 p.m. If you're used to cities where food is available 24/7, you might want to plan your meals ahead, especially if you're traveling through quieter areas. And here's another helpful tip. Don't get too casual with greetings. Americans can be friendly and open, but terms like sir and ma'am are still commonly used as signs of respect, especially in more formal or professional settings. While in many parts of the world, you can get away with a casual hey or first names, showing a little extra politeness in the US, particularly in places like the South, can go a long way in making a good impression. Lastly, don't overlook local state laws. The US is made up of 50 states, and they each have their own rules and regulations. Something that's perfectly fine in one state might be illegal in another. For example, drinking alcohol in public spaces like parks is allowed in some areas but strictly prohibited in others. It's worth checking out the specific laws in the state you're visiting so you don't accidentally get into trouble. And that's it. Those are some of the top things to not do when visiting America. Keep these tips in mind, and you'll have a smoother, more enjoyable trip. Whether you're here for the big cities or the natural wonders, understanding these little cultural quirks will help you feel more at home. If you've learned something new, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to the Trip Raider for more helpful travel tips. Safe travels, and I'll see you on the next adventure.